News Talk 1250 KBRF. Listen anytime, any place with the new Fergus Now app on your phone. Joining me now, I've got R.C. Drews. And R.C., we've got a lot of really cool things happening as we look at the calendar. Fergus Falls hits 150 years this year, and there are a lot of cool things happening.
Yeah, there absolutely are. Well, good morning, Dave. Good morning to your audience. Thanks for having us here today. We've got a lot going on this year, like you said. 115 years, 1872. Now, it's kind of interesting to talk about that date because when we say 1872, we've got to kind of pinpoint what are we talking about and when are we talking about for the incorporation of Fergus. And what we understand of those early documents is that it was a legislative session either at the end of February or the beginning of March that incorporated Fergus Falls. Interestingly enough, some of the documents show that it was February 29th that the city of Fergus Falls was incorporated, meaning leap day, meaning that strictly speaking, if that is the best day to choose, we're 150 years old, but we've only had 37 birthdays.
I like to think that it's one of those things you still celebrate.
Yeah, well, I think so.
They might have done that on purpose. They're like, hey, let's put them on the 29th. It'll be funny.
Yeah. Now, I think for the purposes of this year, we're looking at a March date is what we're using for a lot of the advertising and so forth. A lot of big things coming up here, especially in this next month, actually. We've got an exhibit opening up at the Otter Tail County Historical Society. They're calling it Fergus Falls Through the Years, and I know that Chris Scholke and his team are getting busy down there to have that open in time for March 18th. And then they've got a Coffee Clatch series. They've been doing this for years, of course, but a little more themed around the 150 and the anniversary. That starts on March 11th. I think, actually, Lynn Olson from City Hall is going to be the first one talking about some of the City Hall events over the last 150 years. Missy Hermes, Chris Scholke, David Nickelmo, a lot of great people lined up through the end of April right now. And then, of course, things throughout the year after that, too, that we can talk about.
And one of the big things that's going to be happening that I'm looking forward to, we're working on getting it broadcast, is on March 30th, they're going to do kind of a historic version of a city council meeting.
Yeah. Now, this is, again, something that Chris Scholke, to give credit where it's due, is putting a lot of effort into producing this and coming up with something that's going to be interesting, highlight some of the big events over the last 150 years, some of the controversies over the last 150 years, and get the city council, local government involved with that for this special meeting. So I don't know everything that he has planned, but I know that it's going to be a lot of fun, and I hope people will look forward to that March 30th at 5 o'clock.
Looking forward to that, and like I said, we're working on getting that on the radio as well. And one of the big things that they're going to unveil here at that meeting, and one of the things we're going to give everybody a sneak preview a little bit later on here on KBRFradio.com, is the Sesquicentennial Anniversary Commemorative coins.
Yeah, now don't choke on that word.
The Sesquicentennial, yes. It's definitely a $5 word.
Yeah.
For 150.
For 150. Yes. So now this is an exciting project to me. We have a 150th anniversary committee. This was organized by Chris Scholke again. We're going to hear his name a lot, I think, during this conversation, and he deserves a lot of credit for the things that are going on. Had a lot to do with the 150th anniversary celebration of Otter Tail County as well. But last year, we had a group that began meeting to plan for the 150th, just as they did in 1972 for the 100th. And we started brainstorming ideas. Now, this group doesn't necessarily have its own budget or anything, but we wanted to provide sort of a framework for other organizations in the community that wanted to celebrate the 150th and wanted to be able to tie into a greater structure and network, make sure that we help facilitate those connections. And one of the first ideas at one of our first meetings, and this was probably halfway through last year, was the idea for a commemorative coin. Now, it was something that was done in 1972 for the centennial. They put out a nice little sterling silver coin. There are a few of those still around town, and I've seen at least one of them. I'd be curious to know, if you're listening, if you happen to have one. I'd love to know about that because I haven't seen too many of them, but there have to be several that have survived. We thought that it was an interesting idea, but it sort of died on the table at that first meeting. And credit where it's due, Michael Bergraff was the one to bring that idea to the group. It just, for whatever reason, didn't get momentum at that time. It took several months. And I think it was about November or December for our meeting that we sat down and we were talking again about the possibility of a coin. I'd had members of the community that had brought the idea to me again in connection to that 1972 coin and said, what about something like this? And so we sat down and we talked it over, and I can tell you one of the biggest concerns was funding something like that. What does it cost? Who do you have do it? And where are you going to get the money to pay for something like that? We'd have to have sponsors, somebody in the community that would make it happen. And so ultimately, the decision was made that we were going to try to pursue this, and we were going to see if we could make it happen. So we started sending out requests for bids to mints across the country. And you start to realize the number of mints that there are and the variety of products that they offer. How do you narrow down what a commemorative coin should look like? What should it cost? That sort of thing. What are the expectations of the community for a project like this? And ultimately, we found Osborne Coinage in Cincinnati, Ohio. Now, I got to tell you, possibly the coolest mint in the country. I don't know, the federal mint, they've got some credibility too, but Osborne Coinage, they've done some absolutely fascinating projects. They're the oldest private mint in the United States, founded in 1837.
Wow, so it goes back.
It goes way back. So during the Civil War, they're already a couple of decades old. But not only that, but during the Civil War, I've spoken to their rep a little bit because I have sort of a fascination with history. And he told me that their mint was functioning during the Civil War, and being in Cincinnati, they're right on that Ohio-Kentucky border. And so naturally that meant they were pulled between North and South. And in fact, they had contracts with both the Union and Confederate Army to produce coins during the Civil War. They still have artifacts of those coins that remain today. They survived World War I and World War II, the scrap metal shortages and so forth, minting tokens out of felt and other materials. This is a group that has been around. They've done some just incredible things. And one of the things that was challenging for this kind of project, of course, is that, well, a lot of mints aren't necessarily willing to take on an order of 600,000 coins, something like that. It's just too small. They work in tens of thousands, hundreds, maybe sometimes even millions, depending on casino tokens and the sort of things that they might be doing. But Osborne was willing to work with us. They were willing to get this ball rolling and come up with a price that was going to be affordable for our community. And so that's really where it started. And maybe we'll talk about where it went next then.
And obviously, when you want to do a coin or a token, you got to come up with a design. And the design, obviously, you need a heads and you need a tails. And thankfully, Fergus Falls had several different options to choose from. And I haven't seen it yet. So let's maybe bring it out and let's see what we're going to be looking at for these commemorative coins.
Sure. Now, we're going to be sharing this online. So
we will be sharing it online. It'll be on KBRFradio.com and on KBRF's Facebook page. It'll be on a little bit later on this afternoon. We'll get it on.
Excellent. Well, Dave, now the audience isn't privy to seeing this, but I'm going to show you a drawing in ink, and it's rough. But this is a concept sketch that I sat down with Blaise Buseth, noted local artist. We talked about design ideas for this, and he really gave some valuable input on what we might do. And so I'm not an artist, but I made an effort with a blue pen to come up with something that seemed like it sort of represented Fergus Falls. And I've got actually a couple of things here, and I'll just pass you this one. I think it might be, you know what? The one that you have there is the final design. We worked through a couple ideas, but you can see how it connects to that original design. So for the audience not able to see this, what we settled on is a design that on the front features Otto the Otter. Of course, iconic Fergus Falls and the largest otter in the world. I can tell you that the reaction from the mint, by the way, when they saw these coins coming off the line, they're saying, "What is with this giant otter? Why would they want an otter on a coin?"
It's one of our main symbols. I mean, we are the Fergus Falls Otters, Ottertail County.
Absolutely. Interestingly enough, I think it was in the 1960s, the Chamber of Commerce wanted to have otters in the Ottertail River because how appropriate. Yep. You don't see a lot of otters around here, and the name is derived from the shape of Ottertail Lake and not necessarily from the presence of otters. But they wanted otters in the Ottertail River. Well, it never succeeded, but they did get beavers, and the beavers started chewing down all the trees behind City Hall, and they were forcibly removed from.
Oddly enough, I have seen an otter actually in our parking lot here.
Really?
I have. It was probably close to 20 years ago, and I remember Joanna, our receptionist at the time, and one of the other part-timers, Pete, and I were sitting there watching this thing come across the hotel parking lot, and it'd scamper up, then stand on its hind legs, look around, scamper, and look, and I'm like, what is that? And then it got close enough, you could see the two-tone and the size, and you're like, that's an otter.
Yeah.
What's an otter running through the, at the time, Lakes Radio parking lot? I mean, obviously now it's Layton Broadcasting parking lot, and it just kind of went into the slough that's between us and the Big Wood.
Sure. Yeah, you probably saw Otto from a couple miles off and thought it was home.
Exactly.
So we went with Otto for the front. Now, the audience may or may not know this, but 1972 was the dedication of Otto. He was actually a gift to the city by Steve Janish and a high school metalworking class. And so it seems appropriate that he's become sort of an icon for the community. And when we were looking at the design for the head of the coin, Otto seemed a natural fit.
Definitely, when you're looking for head. And then as we kind of look at, Ottertail County and Otto the Otter, let's look into the name Fergus Falls. And one of the big things that comes up, obviously, is falls.
The river, yeah. Yeah, well, when we talk about the founding, Joseph Whitford, James Fergus, George B. Wright, Benjamin Densmore, now a little-known name, but all of them were drawn to this area, even Michael Schneider, because of the falls, what today is Central Dam. We don't have the opportunity to appreciate Central Dam as it existed as the falls naturally, but we wanted a design on the back of the coin for the reverse that somehow paid homage to that time and to that impetus for founding a city here, the river. And so we came up with a design that I feel represents the place where the prairie meets the woods at the river. And the central focus of that back of the coin is the river, that water power where the dam was built. And of course, we've got a flock of Canada geese flying over the top of it, because it's also sort of an iconic Fergus Falls. But there's a slogan that we've included on the back, the coming city of the Northwest. Now, are you familiar with the coming city?
I am familiar with that. George B. Wright.
George B. Wright, as a matter of fact.
I learned that from Chris Schulke.
What a guy. Well, when George B. would advertise the city, he really was sort of a P.T. Barnum of his age, and his boosterism was largely the result of, the reason why Fergus was so successful, but he would always advertise it as the coming city of the Northwest. So we wanted a design that in imagery paid homage to that time, but also by having that slogan on the back, paid homage to that time.
And it very beautiful designs. I love how they incorporated, like you said, you've got the prairie meets the woods on one side of the river, you got woods, on the other side you got prairie. Obviously, when you think Fergus Falls, nowadays one of the big things you do think of is geese, because there's geese everywhere.
Yeah.
And so, obviously, a gorgeous design, and you mentioned that it's going to be minted in silver, and obviously silver is going to be a little bit more spending,
yes,
a little harder to produce. What are the other metals you're going to be using?
Well, so we're doing silver and copper, and maybe now is as good a time as any to show this to you. Now, the audience is going to get to see this online. We've got a photo of this that we'll be sharing, as we said, but Dave, you have the opportunity to see this in person.
So this is one of the absolute first ones to be seen.
There are only 4 of these in the world.
Wow.
At this moment. Now, that one is the pure copper coin. Now, the audience, hopefully just bear with us. It's 0.99 pure copper, 0.999 pure copper coin.
Very nice. It's probably the size of probably about silver dollar or 50-cent piece. Probably.
Yeah. Well, yeah. It's a 39 millimeter coin, so it's a 1 ounce coin. And in both cases, we're going to have a 0.999 pure copper, and we'll have a 0.999 pure silver. Now, you may or may not be able to see, an audience, when you see this online, take and see if you can spot this in the picture, but in the reverse of the coin, down in the river, you can see that each material is stamped accordingly. 0.999 pure copper on the copper, 0.999 pure silver on the silver.
Yep.
We did a lot of interviewing with collectors and members of the community to see what were they seeking, and especially with collectors, they told us that it was important that the coin represent the material that it's made from, so that it always has, if nothing else, the material value in addition to any sentimental value.
So are these each 1 ounce?
They are. Yep, they'll each be 1 ounce. Now, in the case of these pre-productions, it's worth noting that the one in your right hand, the copper, is pure copper through and through. The silver one, I believe, is actually a silver plating over a brass coin for the pre-productions. Silver is, of course, a little bit more expensive, and so for the pre-productions, they weren't going to stamp out a...
So basically proof coins.
Yes, proof coins, exactly.
I mean, they're very impressive. Now, I know one of the first things I asked you when we were talking about this a little bit yesterday, and everybody's going to be thinking of this question here right now is, how do I get one?
Yeah. And I hope they are, and we look forward to that. So the answer is there's going to be 2 opportunities. Now, the first is actually coming up on March 1st, just a couple of weeks away. We're going to be having a giveaway of these coins, and we're going to have 1 grand prize winner will be receiving one of the 0.999 pure silver coins, and 9 runner-up winners will be receiving the 0.999 pure copper coins. These coins will also include a certificate of authenticity, which will be unique to the winner coins as well as the sponsor coins.
And we touched on a little bit when we were talking about selecting a foundry or a mint for the coins, that it is a very limited run of how many are being made. It
is presently. Now, and that's actually a point that we should touch on. So we'll have the giveaway March 1st to be announced on March 15th. And then those coins, we're hoping to have presented at that special meeting of the City Council on March 30th. That hasn't been officially confirmed, but tentatively that's our plan, pending approval from City Hall. And then there's going to be a 1-month exclusivity window where the folks that won that contest, the 9 copper coins, the 1 silver coin, they'll have 1 month to be the only folks in town that can get their hands on these coins. And then May 1st will be the retail launch of these coins, the silver and the copper. And that'll be available at the Otter Tail County Historical Society gift shop. It'll be available at Victor Lundin Company. And all of the proceeds, there is no overhead on this project. All of the proceeds are going to the Otter Tail County Historical Society for their continued work in preserving our local history.
So that's where you get it. And now, if they sell out very quickly, which I got a feeling they are,
I hope so.
Is there a chance for a second run?
Yes. Something that was really important to us was making sure that these were available and that they were reasonably priced as well. This is a fundraiser, of course, for the Otter Tail County Historical Society, so we want to see that it's valuable for their mission. But at the same time, we want to make sure that people can get these. So we worked with 7 sponsors in the community, and maybe if you don't mind, we'll give just a quick mention of who those are.
Yep.
Okay. So we've got Affinity Plus Federal Credit Union, we've got Bell Banks, FM Bank, American Federal Bank, and we've got City of Fergus Falls, we've got Visit Fergus Falls, and also Green Plains Energy.
Did it all without looking at your notes.
Just barely.
I was following along just in case you missed one.
No, I appreciate that. All of these organizations were kind enough to provide donations to the Historical Society for the purchase of these coins. Total cost in this project was $7,000, and it was incredible to see the support of the community for taking on something like this. And because of their generous donation, then the sale of these coins, again, all of that money is going to the Otter Tail County Historical Society. We made sure that there was only a modest profit on it just because we wanted to make sure that they were accessible, like I've said. And to that point, if we do sell out of them quickly, which we absolutely hope that we will, if we do sell out quickly, we intend to go back for a second order again to make sure that people can get these. More than anything, that's what's important to us rather than making them highly exclusive.
You don't want to be looking 50 years back as we come on the double centennial. It's probably got a big fancy name too. And only know of a couple in existence, kind of like the centennial ones. There's only really a couple known. You want, oh, hey, Bob's got that, Ted's got one.
Yeah.
You want people who want them to have them because it's a very it is a collectible item because, as you mentioned, it's pure silver and pure copper, which are both very collectible.
Yeah.
And because they are collectible, let's discuss a little bit about how much they're going to cost.
Yeah, we should definitely talk price. So I mentioned that we're going to have 500 coins in copper. We're going to have 100 coins in silver. Again, pure metals in both cases. Now, the copper coins are going to be available for $6. And that is the coin only. I think it'll be the coin only in a plastic bag. And then the silver coins are actually going to be available in a acrylic case. And that's the way those will all come. You won't have to buy that as an extra. It's included in the price of $45. So $6 for the pure copper, $45 for the pure silver. An acrylic case comes with the pure silver. Now, I know that Victor Lundin's and possibly the Historical Society as well are looking into maybe some display options for these coins as well.
Okay.
So when you pick up your coin, if you want a desk stand or something like that, we'll see what they're able to find, but there should be some options available for that too.
Sounds good. And so we got a little bit of an update here on a little bit of the activities happening here for the 150th. We got an idea on the coins. But one of the other things you've been working on that I've been really interested in, and I've talked to Scholke about this a little bit, you're also working on a book. And it kind of started off as a 150th of celebration here for the county and such, but you're also working on a book, the true history of Otter Tail County.
Yeah. Well, and starting with founding Fergus Falls, a history, coming out later this day. Now, I can tell you that I've had some surprises along the road with this as well. Just yesterday, I discovered that this book already has a page listing on Goodreads.com where you can sign up to like it, supposedly buy it on Amazon, even though it's not out yet. I had somebody call me yesterday and said, "Is your book out? I see it's listed." Well, no. Anyways, hopefully people are excited about that as well. This is something that we've been working on for, it's been 3 years now already.
Yeah, it's been a while.
It's been a long time. It's also a community-sponsored project, and so it behooves me to at least say a very sincere thank you. If you're listening in the audience and somebody who sponsored and helped make that book possible, thank you so much for that support, and we hope that the community is really going to look forward to it. But we started in January 2019, and what I can say about that is that the world was a very different place in January of 2019.
Yes, it was.
Than it is where we are today. We have had adventure upon adventure in uncovering the city's early history. Now, myself, I am a writer and now author here operating from Fergus Falls, and I'm fifth generation Fergus Falls with a daughter who's sixth generation. We've been here a long time, since the early 1880s, late 1870s, within a decade of the founding. But what amazed me working through this book was how little I knew about the city's history, including the namesake figure, James Fergus, but George B. Wright, Joseph Whitford, and others. I came to realize how ignorant I was, and through this opportunity to research this project, how ignorant I still remain to be. There's so much more that we'd like to know. But ultimately, the book has resolved itself as sort of a 350-page narrative history of Fergus Falls. You know, it was really important to us that we write a book like a good novel that you would want to read from the beginning to end. You'll see the birth of the city, but you'll see before the city exists as well. We'll travel up the river with Benjamin Densmore, who I mentioned earlier. Benjamin Densmore and C.W. Innings. Now, these are two folks that I would wager most people in the community have never heard of, that still have a not insignificant connection to the city's early history. In fact, Benjamin Densmore, very nearly our founding father, had he not arrived here to find somebody already on the site. And now we don't know specifically who that somebody was. There's actually a couple of possibilities. If you're familiar with the history of Fergus Falls and then listening in the audience, you might be thinking Joseph Whitford, and there's every possibility that's correct. It could have also been Michael Schneider, the Wild Dutchman. It's hard to say because Densmore doesn't tell us, but Densmore didn't succeed, and so Whitford, Joseph Whitford, whose statue is over near Zion Church now today, he was the man that held down the site. But then Whitford was killed in the 1862 Sioux Uprising near Fort Abercrombie, and so all of a sudden the claim to Fergus Falls falls into the ether. And the amazing thing is that the city site survived ultimately to be recovered by George B. Wright. This book project has taken us quite literally across the country, and we've made some discoveries that we didn't know were even an opportunity to discover. I think one of the things that I hope the audience will be interested in is, especially regarding Joseph Whitford, you know, he's somebody that we didn't really know much about prior to this, and we still don't know that much about after this, as far as that goes. He remains a bit of an enigma, but we had this vision of him as sort of a early pioneer hero, and that's probably not unfair. But it turns out that the only real description that we have of Joseph Whitford came from a letter written by James Fergus, the namesake of Fergus Falls, who never lived here. He did visit a couple of times, though. There's a myth that he was never here, and that's untrue. We have primary source documents showing that he was here at least 3 times, possibly a 4th. But Joseph Whitford, the only account we have is from this letter written by James Fergus in 1889. This letter was reprinted in the Fergus Falls Journal. It was reprinted in the Little Falls Transcript, because Fergus was actually a major figure in the founding of Little Falls, and had much more involvement with Little Falls than he did with Fergus Falls, ironically. But it gives this larger-than-life account of this incredible man. He took down an entire family of bears with a single shot from his shotgun. He came and returned to his cabin one day and found an Indian war party raiding his cabin, and with a word, he turned them away. Just this larger-than-life man. So while we were working on this book, we were working specifically on the materials on Fergus, and we knew that what we had here in Otter Tail County was somewhat limited. We wanted to find more. We discovered a relative, a descendant of Fergus in Alaska that maintains some of the family's history. That led us through a series of wormholes, but ultimately it led us to a doctoral thesis from the University of Missoula in Montana, a Dr. Robert M. Horn, now a resident in North Dakota just nearby and a fantastic man himself. But at the time, as it turns out, the James Fergus papers had just recently, within the last decade, been turned over to the University of Missoula. Now, I think a reasonable question, if you're listening in the audience, is why on earth were the James Fergus papers turned over to the University of Missoula, Montana, and not to Fergus Falls, Minnesota?
Because he moved that way.
Because he moved that way. Because he was the namesake of Fergus County, Montana, and he spent much more time near the Judith Mountains at the Armel's Ranch than he ever did at Fergus Falls. And what's really interesting is in reviewing Horn's doctoral thesis, we come to learn that, well, James Fergus, from his standpoint, from the standpoint of people who knew him, they didn't know anything about Fergus Falls. That wasn't what he was remembered for. He was remembered for the things that he did in Montana. And so we worked with the University of Missoula on the best way to get a hold of these documents. You know, how do we work from this? And ultimately, the decision was made that the best thing to do was to drive to Missoula, Montana. And so that's what we did. And we spent a week out there, staying in a apartment above a historic theater and walking back and forth to the University of Missoula every day, most of them raining, but pouring every minute that they would allow in the archives department at the University of Missoula. And where this connects to Joseph Whitford, and what was fascinating about this trip, is that as we were paging through Fergus's materials, now this is 11 linear feet. And to imagine that's documents stacked side by side for 11 feet of papers. Now, they're organized by subject to some extent, but they're not organized for the purpose of writing a book. Yeah. They're organized for the purpose of maybe finding a connection to another individual. So, for example, there are folders for Ignatius Donnelly, governor of Minnesota one time and senator. And a notable person here in Minnesota and in the country, a friend of James Fergus, and they kept up a regular correspondence. George Stevens in Moline, Illinois, and others. But what we discovered that we didn't know existed in this collection, there was a small yellow folder. It was probably no more than a 1/4 inch thick. And the label across the top was Joseph Whitford. And inside were 12 original handwritten letters from Joseph Whitford to James Fergus, from the founding site of Fergus Falls during the founding years and regarding the founding of Fergus Falls. This was, for the first time in 160 years, Joseph Whitford telling his side of the story, and it didn't match to what we'd been told. And the book is going to share that.
Looking forward to that. I mean, obviously, we talked a little bit out there. We got a little ways to go before this hits publication. Do you think it might be done by the end of the year?
Yes. Oh, it absolutely will be done by the end of the year. Yes. Yeah. We've had obviously some road bumps that have come up as a result of COVID and other challenges. Now, ironically, the 150th presents its own challenge in that there are so many other events that the Historical Society and others are involved with getting planned for this year that it's all got to fit somewhere. There's so much time in a day, but absolutely will be out this year. I think when we talk about some of the COVID challenges, what happened for researchers in March of 2020 was really our access to materials shut down completely. Museums, libraries, university archives all closed their doors. And the world took a deep breath as we waited to see what would happen with COVID and hope that everything returned to normal. And of course, as we all know, that still hasn't quite happened. But for our project specifically, it meant that we no longer had access to the materials that we needed to be able to complete this book. And that was a real challenge. In fact, it took, I think it was more than 9 months, getting close to a year, to get access to some of the materials from the Minnesota Historical Society right here in Minnesota. Now, what I can say is that there was also a fabulous success story that resulted out of that. Through the work of some of our local legislators and politicians, we were able to work with the administration of the Minnesota Historical Society. And I'm very pleased to say that, in fact, I was down in St. Paul in November at the annual meeting of MNHS in front of their board of directors, where our local representative, Jordan Rasmussen, gave a presentation on founding Fergus Falls and the way the project was able to navigate COVID working with MNHS. But the long short of that is that what MNHS had that we didn't have locally was the papers of George B. Wright, who truly would be the founding father of Fergus Falls, despite the namesake being James Fergus. Incidentally, the two men did not know each other until many years later. So it may or may not be more or less happenstance that George B. decided to keep that name associated with somebody that he didn't meet until about 1889. But what they had in Minneapolis, in St. Paul, was George B. Wright's family collection of papers. Now, we talk about James Fergus's papers at 11 linear feet. I don't have a measurement in linear feet for George B. Wright, but what I can tell you is it's more than 10,000 pages.
Wow.
It is enormous. It is boxes and boxes of material. And this, dear audience, I have to say, is fascinating material. This was an incredible man, and we are fortunate to have had him as a founding father for our city. He didn't live to see it for too long. He died within, I forget, unfortunately, now being on the air, I forget the date off the top of my head, but it was in the 1880s that he passed away here in Fergus Falls. But it was because of him that the city succeeded, and he lived an extraordinary life. born on the East Coast, and he ended up being a surveyor for the railroad and ultimately became a surveyor for the state. And what's interesting is that when we think about surveying today, it's a desk job to some extent. I mean, you go out in the field, you take measures. It's a pretty comfortable way to make a living. But in the 1850s, it was not the same thing.
No GPS back then.
No, gosh, no. There was no satellite to take a photo and to draw out your maps. And this was all being done from ground level based on approximations and estimated. And it's incredible to look at the maps from that age and see how well they hold up versus the satellite photos that we have today. They did an extraordinary job. But George B. Wright was one of these surveyors that was making Minnesota a possibility in the 1850s. And he lived out in the middle of anywhere when he was working, and he was gone for months at a time. His wife, Serena Marie, would sit at home and worry and wait. And in fact, they were apart for so long, and it was so hard on the family. The belief was that if he could work for just a few years and set aside some money, they were going to be okay. They were going to get a more permanent house. He'd find something a little easier on the family, and they'd settle down. That was the idea. But he was gone for months at a time, and it was very difficult on Serena. And she usually went by Serena Marie, by both names. And she, too, has a fascinating backstory that you'll be able to read about in the book here. But George would address her as either Serena or Marie. He said that she had two personalities, and he recognized both of them, and he would write to both of them separately. They had an unbelievable romance for the ages. They corresponded to the tune of 12 pages several times a week in each direction. And it's hard to even imagine how there could be so much to say, but I can tell you the letters are absolutely fascinating. They're a joy to read. But they had one of their first children, and off the top of my head, I'm forgetting exactly how old he was at the time. I think he was about 18 months, but George was away again, and sometime after it had happened, Serena wrote to George and said, I hate to tell you, but I have to tell you that our son is dead. And she said, I wanted to write to you, but I knew all it would do is make you upset. There was nothing you can do anymore. It's over. And it's hard to imagine a time period like that where the death of your own child doesn't reach you for another couple of weeks by way of your spouse. But unfortunately, Serena didn't live to see George's success either. She passed away as well, and I think it may have been partly that drove George to do something great, and really to become just an incredible man. And his son, of course, Vernon, was one of the heads of Otter Tail Power, and part of the impetus for the founding of that company, which is now a local institution as well. So much connection to the city's history and success.
So we'll definitely be seeing this book a little bit later on this year. Looking forward to that 150th anniversary for Fergus Falls. Again, big event celebrating coming up here on March 30th. And we're going to unveil the design of the coins on KBRFradio.com and on KBRF's Facebook page a little bit later on this morning. So, RC, thanks for coming in. Anything else we want to touch on? We've got about 30 seconds left.
We got about 30 seconds. Well, I just hope that everybody will look forward to the events we have planned for this year. It's a huge milestone to reach 150 years, especially when you look at what happened in 1919. We did rebuild bigger, better Fergus Falls. What a success story.
Sounds excellent. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
R.C. Drew's joining us on Newstalk 1250 KBRF. Listen anytime, any place with the new Fergus Now app on your phone.